So was this the main entry point for seafarers coming into Liverpool?
Yeah, this is the Albert Dock. This is perhaps one of the biggest tourist attractions in Liverpool, but actually the docks would stretch along the coastline and there would be entry points along the way.
And so primarily when the black people settled here, was it close by?
It was close by because the black community was largely founded by seafarers, really from the late 1800s onwards, really, and they would have settled obviously close to the docks just across the way there, in what's now known as Liverpool 1 and then up into Liverpool 8 as the period progressed.
So what's this?
This is our new museum, the Museum of Liverpool, and it really is exploring the history and the culture of Liverpool people, and it's kind of replacing a small museum that was down here called the Museum of Liverpool Life. But there was an exhibition in which the 1919 race riots featured. 1919 was mobs of angry white workers searching the streets for black people to take that anger out on.
So where are we going now?
We're going to Liverpool 8, which is where Writing on the Wall is based, but which is also still home to the majority of Liverpool's black community and the descendants really of those seafarers that we've been talking about.
Lovely.
Come on. So this is Upper Stanhope Street, which runs right down to Stanhope, becomes Stanhope Street and runs right down to the docks where we were before, but a little bit further along, and it would have been that kind of lower area where the black community first settled, where the seafarers first settled in Liverpool. And actually on this street there was a boarding house for seafarers who were employed by the Elder Dempster Line, it was a shipping line that employed a lot of black labour, not on very favourable conditions, I might add. And their boarding house was a target of attack during those 1919 race riots. And from about the 1920s, the black community began to move up the hill and into, so that would be Liverpool 1, and into Liverpool 8, or Toxteth as the press termed the area after the riots, but more locally known as Liverpool 8, and the community, as I say, began to move up the hill throughout the 20s and 30s and to settle in the streets that I'm going to take you now. This is Princes Avenue and it runs through, it's one side of what's called the Granby Triangle in the centre of Liverpool 8, and you can see from the size of the boulevard, the size of the Victorian mansions, that this area was once a very wealthy area. This became the heart of the black community, if you like.
Thank you so much for taking me around. It's been great learning the history and heritage of Liverpool, especially concerning the black community.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's
thank
lovely.
you.
I've come to the Merseyside Maritime Museum, which hosts the International Slavery Museum, to meet Dr. Ray Costello, who's going to share his contributions to the development of the museum and also share some accounts that relate to 1919 Liverpool.
Quite a heavy subject to deal with, slavery, and we weren't sure about how the public were going to receive it. One thing that did come up was to give people a feeling, some kind of positive feeling out of a very, very negative situation. So what we did was we decided we'd have an Achievers' Wall. And the Achievers' Wall were basically people who had come through slavery, either come through slavery themselves and managed to achieve in spite of it, or were the descendants of slaves.
So does the museum hold any information on 1919?
The whole business of black history is at such a point in that we don't know what we've got, in fact. We're just finding out the history, unearthing the history of black people. There were very many nasty incidents in 19, and we could list the Liverpool Echo, for instance, and various papers at the time, are absolutely full of people who've been injured, their houses burnt down. They burnt down the houses, they chased individual black sailors and soldiers in their uniforms in some cases through the streets of Liverpool. They invaded the Liverpool black settlement area around Pitt Street and Stanhope Street and burnt their houses.
So here you are, featuring in the museum yourself.
Yeah, very rare actually. It wasn't my idea. This is my grandfather, Albert James, who was in the Royal Field Artillery Regiment during the war in Mesopotamia, now Palestine area, and his wife. This is his grandfather, his father, a Bermudan sailor, Edward James, and his wife. This is my mum, who was only 5 years old at the time when her mum died, and a brother a year older. But many of the local black people had a dreadful time.
So Ray, could you explain this wall for me, please?
Yeah, this wall is basically a timeline of significant incidents. In some cases, not only the slavery period, but in the history of black people and the struggle for civil liberties. Don't forget, even in 1919, during the riot, there were British-born black people.
Of course.
And there were people domiciled for years.
Of course.
Slavery had an impact on how all black people were perceived. So that you'll get black people who never endured slavery, or families have never been through it all, from Africa, for instance,
Yes.
who still are perceived in that same way when it comes to prejudice. That's an important point to raise.
Ray, it's been fantastic walking around the International Slave Museum with you today. And not only that, but looking at how it was put together, the thought process that went into it, those that contributed to it, and hearing your stories and bringing that more to life, the stories of 1919, and more so about your family as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and meet with me today.
Believe I'm here, so I can go.
Liverpool has given me so much food for thought. I'm quite reluctant to leave, but I've come back to the docks, and I think this is one place I'll definitely be returning to. And I'm contemplating leaving London for a minute and going off to Manchester and seeing what went on there. It's my hometown, it's so close to Liverpool, and there's so much going on here currently and for 1919 that I want to just go a bit further down the River Mersey and see what was going on in Manchester in 1919, perhaps visit the library archives, the People's Museum, and just pass through and then head off to London.
Darker day, darker day, darker day, darker day.
Last night I was contemplating going home to Manchester, and I've decided I'm actually going to go. I think it's really important to find out what was going on in Manchester in 1919, just a stone throw away from here in Liverpool, and to speak to one of the best educators I know, my mother.
These walls again. Please come alive. Is everything alright? Is everything set now?
As I'm in Manchester, I thought I'd pop into the People's History Museum. As a national museum, they must have some information on 1919 Britain. Now, Main Gallery 1 holds information from as early as 1790 all the way through to 1945, but I'm particularly interested in this section here, 1821 to 1930s. I think that's where I'm going to find some golden nuggets on 1919 Britain.
Again. These old ways of pushing down these souls again. Come alive, is everything alright? Is everything set now? Peace on the line, is everything fine? Is everything set now?
I've been around the gallery, and actually there is no information on the riots that took place in Britain in 1919. There's a lot of information about Labour at the time and politics at the time, but nothing that specifically demonstrates that those riots even went on. It really does highlight, though, that the British men gave themselves out for service and came back to find that their promises had not been delivered by the government, but there is nothing that states that the riots even took place here, which personally I find quite surprising.
These cold winds are blowing down these walls again.
I'm back in my hometown, Altrincham, which is where I grew up and went to school. This is my school, Loreto Grammar School, where me and my sisters went, and there was really a small number of black students in the school at the time, but I don't remember any incidents where we were subjected to any kind of racism whatsoever. Colour really didn't come into it. But then I also know that there was a huge lack in the education of black history. So I'm going to go and speak to my mum, who will probably shed some light on why that was.
Remember the time it was after dark. We climbed over the gates and into the park.
So I've just been to the People's History Museum in Manchester, and there's no information whatsoever on the contributions of black people in the First World War or in the years running up after that. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with how black people are categorized. When you look at the term community, black community, community is a poor cousin of society, and around that period, much had to do with the canons of literature and what curriculums people had, teachers had to use in the schools as a norm. So the whole thing has to do with opportunity, I think. If there's an aggregate of how you look at opportunity, it's as, what's his name? It's Machiavellian said, it's everything, there's an element of chance, and there is, because who gets the opportunity to do the teaching, the education, the writing, the filming? Even during the riots in Manchester, academics were arrested. They were going out there to help black kids and to stop them. But because it's not inbuilt in the education system that there are black people in the community that, at a high level, that they would go and stop the riots, they would go and talk to the kids. Most of them in Manchester then were arrested. and they were arrested and locked up, some of them, and people had to go and vouch for them. No, this is a youth worker. This is a community worker. Because a lot of it was around the church. I mean, it's similar to the education in Britain anyway. It all started around the church with, you know, people with Sunday school and women learning to write, you know, because the men were out doing whatever.
In the archive information that I've seen so far, a lot of the letters to the Lord Mayor came from the churches, from the Ethiopian church in Glasgow, and a lot of the churches were writing on behalf of the congregation and saying, this is what the state of play, we need you to do something about it.
So I think you hit the nail on the head there, because I think that's where it's all changing. And something it was sadly missed in a sense. You get the Jewish churches, you get the Muslim churches, but you know, you couldn't have a school because you were black, but you could have a school because you had it was about a black religion. But as I said, if you're living in a society, I think you have to the norm is that children should go to school and they should mix, and it should be education for all, and it shouldn't be a black education, because I'm not quite clear there is such a thing as a black education.
I went to the International Slave Museum yesterday in Liverpool and interviewed Dr. Ray Costello, and he said there has been quite a lot of education on black history, the history of black people, but it was only because in certain schools there were movers and shakers that were actually pressing forward for it.
And I think these things are discussed in the school, citizenship, things like that matter, what makes you British. I think these are the things that they're bringing in to do with black and that is better than just talking about race, because if you say to somebody, you're black, I mean, it doesn't say much. I don't think your color says much about you if somebody's trying to describe you. I think, you know, more importantly is things like citizenship and, you know, giving people opportunities to develop. Because without the opportunity, I think anyone, whether you be black, I mean, black, white or Arab or whoever, if they're given the opportunity and the right chances, they too can rise to it. But sadly, there isn't that many opportunities, and people recognize the wrong enemies when working class are fighting other people, immigrants. Instead of looking at the government, they should support and join together to fight. And to a certain extent in the 1919 rise, perhaps the women did it first.
We went to the Cumber Imani Millennium Centre, and there was a meeting going on between the community leaders and the police at the time, and there's a white man's march set to go through Liverpool, and a letter had been given to the mayor to say if the police or anybody tried to stop the white man's march, they would go into the more heavily populated black communities and start riots there if they tried to stop them.
I think you can't get away from the whole issue really with the 1919 riot, and it hasn't changed now, and as long as people want to sweep it under the carpet, it's not going to change. Then it's become a criteria, so then you have black and white as a legitimate sort of band, if you like. Why would you want to stop a white man's march? Because it's a category, isn't it? They're white, because that's really what's come out of the whole thing. Color came out as a category. If, you know, the teachers and the education people can see it as a bit of history and can, you know, learn lessons from it, you know, we need to get on with it. It's not about letting something terrible happen and then learn a lesson from it. I think that's where they need to stop.
Yeah.
Stop that and sort of see what's the best way to, you know, to move this on, really. And it's about one education for all. It's not about whether you're black or indifferent. It's the spirit of black cooperation, yeah? And I don't think the spirit of black cooperation is enough, that black people just sit and, you know, sort of think, I'm black, you're black. No. And don't employ somebody because they're black. And that's the other thing. And people think, oh, well, it's, what do they call it? Role modeling and just taking somebody. There was a word for it.
I remember when I went to university and I was leaving, you said, now just remember, you are an actress who happens to be a black, not a black actress.
And that's what I said when I was at MMU. I told them straight, I'm a lecturer who happens to be black. And I said it before Obama said it, not a black lecturer. And that's the way to go about it, really. But while the color thing, black, this and that, and they build things on blackness, then it does divide, and it does give, you know, the idea that some people have a legitimate right to having something by virtue of their color and privilege. that they have privileges. You know, everyone should feel it. You know, it's a citizenship. If you're a citizen, you should have all the rights, irrespective of color.
Do you remember the time it was after dark?